Well, welcome back to another episode of the FEI podcast, Flatirons Young Adults. Today we are joined by Dan Foote. Dan, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for
Let's try it. Re-roll.
Thanks for enjoying me.
Dan, I do enjoy you. This is great. All right,
I kind of wanted to roll with that.
Yeah,
but
no, we could. It'd be awesome.
You should use that.
We should. We might. Should we just go?
Yes.
Let's just go. All right. Yeah, we're here with Dan. Dan, that was the best intro ever. Would you mind, Dan? Dan, you're our Longmont campus pastor. Would you just give everybody a little bit more of a lowdown? Who you are, your relationship with Flatirons, all that stuff.
Well, I am the second oldest staff member.
let's go.
Come on.
Yeah, I won't name the oldest. She'd get angry with me. And
yeah. So you're like 29?
Yeah. Yeah. No, actually, I tripped the odometer just last week. I'm 63 now. So,
Okay.
But anyway, grew up in Ohio, outside of Cleveland, huge Cleveland fan, still mourning the death of the Indians, but slowly falling in love with the Guardians. And yeah, grew up in Cleveland. I spent most of my professional career as a cartoonist and illustrator.
That's right.
Yeah.
Dan, I always forget that about you. Yeah.
I got out of college. I got hired by a newspaper, small little newspaper in Ohio, worked my way up, moved to New Jersey, doing editorial cartoons. You guys are nodding like, yeah, this is something from history class.
No.
Newspapers.
No.
Yeah.
No,
I'm not gonna lie. When you first say it, I think of the cartoon section of the newspaper is really
Yeah.
what I think.
I
of
didn't
the,
do comic strips.
Comics. Okay.
I did editorial cartoons. So I commented on national, world, local politics, whatever newspaper I was working at.
Wow.
And I landed in 1989. We moved to Dallas, Texas, where I got signed on as the editorial cartoonist of the Dallas Times-Herald, which was a Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper. They're probably most noted. They have many Pulitzers, but the iconic photo that came from, I think his name was Bob Jones, who was a photographer at the Dallas Times-Herald in 1963, shot that photo of Lee Harvey Oswald getting shot with the sheriff kind of cringing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was down the hallway from my office on the 4th floor in the editorial department.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's what I did, editorial cartooning. When that paper closed down, newspapers were dying, I shifted and I started just doing a lot of cartoons and illustrations for faith-related organizations.
Wow. So from there, from obviously the cartoon stuff, how did you become a pastor? How did you get involved with Flatirons? Like,
Well, the quick answer is I married into it,
Yeah.
which I'll get to in a second. But the long answer is this. I grew up going to church. And you know the old adage that sitting in a church doesn't make you a Christian any more than, standing in your garage makes you a car.
sure.
So I grew up around it. I had a faith heritage, but it wasn't until our son was born. I was 25 years old when he was born, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm in charge of this little human.
Yeah.
What do I teach him about what I believe? I don't even believe this. I'm not even sure if I believe it. So it was kind of this, I call it my dark night of the soul. I think the word they use today is I deconstructed my faith, which what I see a lot going on today is not deconstruction, but demolition.
Funny, we did a podcast on that with
So I guess we'll call it that
Yeah,
now.
let's
with
call
your
it out.
son, Ben. We
Ben
actually did
Foote.
an episode on that. So if you're actually curious to learn,
Who's this?
this is Ben Foote.
Yes.
Ever
Okay.
heard of?
ever heard of the guy?
There he
Yeah.
is.
Well, it's funny because, a week ago, yesterday, Ben and I got wings at BW3s. We talked about this. I'm going to call it out now. He has a great idea for a book. Did he mention it?
Yeah, to me. I mean, I talked to him about it. Is he gonna?
I'm pushing him to do it. He's got a
Okay.
great idea about deconstructing your faith, but then reconstructing it.
Right.
And this gets back to what I would say where I was.
Yeah.
They didn't call it that. I walked away. In my mind, I walked away. And there was something that I missed. I couldn't put my finger on it. And it was not just, there was nothing about the heritage part that I would say graceless, church world that I grew up in. what I was missing was Jesus, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. But then what happened was the greatest gift I was given. I was going to church because my wife Amy and I are still relatively newly married. We got married in '81, and this is in '87. And the pastor at our church, I was pretending for Amy's sake, never told her the struggles that I was having, how internally I had walked away. It's like, I don't believe this.
Yeah.
It's like a bunch of fairy tales. And this is the kind of stuff you talk yourself into to go to bed at night.
Yeah.
It's-
Feel
The
good about
world's
yourself.
scary, right?
Right.
But it wasn't until our pastor gave us the NIV 84 study Bible. And I did this. I couldn't, in integrity, walk away. I couldn't tell Amy, my wife, to go, I'm leaving. I've left. But you need to know this when we're until I started to really investigate. And that NIV study Bible, I started reading it. I knew all the Bible stories. I grew up with it.
Yeah.
VBS, Sunday school, evening church, all that. But it wasn't until I started reading it
Wow.
that I started discovering, and I was able to reconstruct.
Yeah.
And the way that I say it is that I was gifted a heritage of faith, but I had, using that imagery from Ephesians 6, I had a helmet of salvation that fit my parents and my grandparents and didn't fit me. I had a breastplate of truth that didn't fit me. I had to go to the forge, and Jesus and I had to work together to hammer this thing, and it was hard to refit it so that it fit me. And now I have a personal faith.
This is
with
like a
Jesus.
whole other podcast that
I
I would
know.
want to talk to you about.
I'd love to dig into that more. at a
Somewhere
different
along
time.
the way, you bumped into flat irons too. You said you married in flat irons. You'll circle back to that.
So what happens is, as I reclaim my faith, we'd moved to Texas. We get involved in a church. And then when the Times Herald folded, and I think it was 92 or 3, I forget, I was freelancing. I could call my own hours. I started getting more and more involved. I was asked over and over and over again, would you lead the adult Bible study on Sunday? I was like, would you teach it? Would you teach I'm not going to teach it. I'm still trying to figure it out. Will you teach it? And then I thought, well, I'm not going to teach it, but I'll lead a discussion. I thought, I'll lead a discussion.
There you go.
And there's nothing better to grow your faith, to firm up your beliefs, understanding of the word, than you have to prepare for this each week.
Yeah.
So I was preparing. I did that for 30 years at that church.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So that's part of it. And then as I matured, as much as I've matured, I still feel like I'm a 13-year-old boy at heart. I like a fart joke as much as anybody.
Yes.
As much as any
You are
boy.
Ben's dad.
Yeah.
So I was asked to come on in leadership. So I was an elder at our church, walked through a really hard time. And it wasn't until, Amy and I went to a small Christian liberal arts college called Milligan College. That's where we met. Amy and I met there. And when it came time for Ben to go to college, his words were, I want to go somewhere where I don't know anybody. And he said, the only place I know it's pretty there, I'm going to go to Milligan. Because we had taken the kids there a couple of times.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. It's in northeast Tennessee, sits at the bottom of Buffalo Mountain, the Appalachian Mountains. It's part of the Appalachian Mountain Range. So it's beautiful there. So he went there, and then he was there for maybe 4 or 5 months in, and I'm on the road. He had free minutes on Sunday, so he would call on Sunday, and we're talking on the phone, and he's telling me, he's like, I met this Allie. I really like Allie. Allie's a really cool girl. And next week, more about Allie.
Yeah.
I don't know, third, fourth week, he's still talking about Allie, but he has a strict order. You can't call during the week because you got to pay for that, and you pay through the nose.
Yeah.
Now this is pre-smartphone. This is flip phone.
Nokia days.
Yeah. So the phone rings. My flip phone. It's on the counter of the kitchen. I look at it. I said, it's Ben. I went, crap. It's Ben. Something's happened. It's Tuesday. He's calling on Tuesday, not Sunday. And I answered the phone. I just went, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Nothing like, hi, bud. No, it's like, what's wrong? And he said, "Oh, nothing's wrong. I got a funny story for you. You know how you've been hearing about Allie?" He goes, "Well, her parents been hearing about Ben, and tonight her mom asked, like, what's Ben's last name?" She said, "Ben Foote." "Is that Dan and Amy Foote's kid?"
No.
And he goes, I said, Who's Allie?" He goes, "I'm dating Jim and Robin Bergen's daughter."
Yeah.
Now, we went together at Milligan. Both Robin and Jim were there. We were with Robin for 2 years, 1 year with Jim, and we just didn't travel in the same circles. You know, Jim talks about he went to a college that was 600 miles from home, and the drinking age was 19. He was with that party crowd,
Yeah.
and I was with the kind of mischievous crowd that, you know, picked up it was the Milligan College Buffaloes. They had a big fiberglass buffalo we take and haul it over campus and get in
Let's
trouble
go.
for it. Yeah, anyway.
Fart jokes and vandalism.
Yep.
So
Talk about-
that's the short way to go to. That's a really long way to go to. Ben met Allie at Milligan.
Yep.
They got married at the wedding. We were together with the Bergens for a week, and it was just like Jim and I just connected.
So for anyone who just doesn't know, just to clarify, Jim Bergen is the lead pastor of Flatirons Church. His daughter is Allie, who is now married to Ben Foote. And now
Yes.
we are sitting across the table from Ben Foote's dad,
Yes.
Dan Foote. That was a quick little
There you go.
synopsis.
Synopsis how it all is.
Ben Foote is our teaching pastor
That's right.
as well.
You're gonna have to edit that up.
No,
Hey, no, it was a good
no.
story.
I love
honestly
that
wish we
story.
could dig more into the glass
I
buffalo being
know.
hauled around, but
Yep.
we'll do that another time. No, Dan, you're now our Longmont campus pastor. You've
Yeah.
served here, men's pastor before, community team.
Yeah, in 2010, let me quickly back up. I had been feeling called into ministry, but I'm a cartoonist. Like, I never mentioned to Amy. It wasn't until about a year before, I think Ben and Allie met. We had a really hard elders meeting. We're walking the dogs, and Amy literally said, I'm telling her the struggles we're having, and she says, "I hate church." And I kind of laughed, and I went, "Well, you probably don't want to hear what I have to say." You're like, "What?" And I said, I feel like God's calling me into ministry."
Wow.
He's like, "What? You're a cartoonist." I said, "I don't know what it means. I've felt this for about 10 years now. All I know is it's like this tuning fork in my heart rings true, even in the midst of this bad stuff. I feel like God has me here for a reason." And then fast forward, I don't know, a year and a half later, after the kids get married, and I get a text from Jim on a night we're walking the dogs again. It's night. My little flip phone buzzes. I open it. It's a text from Jim that says, "Will you and Amy fly up here for Easter? We want to consider you for our men's pastor.
Awesome.
Can't talk now. I'm at a Nuggets game. I'll call you tomorrow at 8." And then I came up, and I was just like, we talked the next day. I said, "I'm not a pastor." He says, "Yeah, you are. You just, I'm going to pay, and we want to bring you up here and pay you for it. Will you at least come up and interview?" And I
Yeah.
agreed to an interview, thinking like, "Yeah, we got a free trip to Colorado."
Awesome.
And I jokingly say all the time, they were foolish enough to offer me the job, and I took it.
Wow.
So I was
that's
men's
amazing.
pastor for 8.5 years, worked with kids ministry for 2 years after we eliminated men's and women's ministry. And,
Yeah.
and then 2 years ago, it was 2 years ago this past Thanksgiving, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Jesse pulled me in his office and said, "Would you come up to Longmont?" So I prayerfully considered that and did it.
Wow.
Here we are.
I love it.
Amazing,
Nice.
man. Love it. Dan, thanks for the background. I will also say, before we get into what we're really going to dig into today, during my first formative years at Flatirons, you had a huge impact on my life. I mean, someone that I would say sincerely in that period of my life was like a spiritual father to me. You and your son have had a huge impact, but you especially have had a huge impact. So big reason why we invited you here today was because you taught me so much about what it means to be a man, what it means to lead as a man. And that's really what we want to dig into today is this whole concept of biblical masculinity and leadership. I think in so much in church world, and we even mentioned this a little bit on our podcast with Jesse, there is this ambiguity, this vagueness to, hey, you're a man, you're supposed to be a spiritual leader, especially as it pertains to the women in your life, the relationships in your life you're supposed to lead. But there's not a lot of instruction around how do we grow in that, how do we do that. I'd love to kind of kick off the conversation just by asking you, hey, how would you define leadership, spiritual leadership, as it relates to biblical masculinity? Like, could you start unpacking that for us?
Yeah, it's funny when you when you originally asked me, like, would you come and talk about biblical masculinity? I always kind of laugh about that, honestly, because the irony is this. The examples we have in the Bible about masculinity are horrendous. Most of them are like train wrecks.
Sure.
I mean, you go to the first biblical man is Adam.
Yeah.
And, he lives in perfection with God. God points out in Genesis 2:18, it's not good for him to be alone. We're going to make a helpmate suitable for him. He makes, Eve. So we have humankind is now in male and female form in God's image, both in God's image. That's, to me, I think this is where we'll probably end up landing, is understanding that both men and women are made in God's image.
Yeah.
We both inhabit God's image. So that's what God has gifted us. But what's Adam's first big test is what? Yeah, they're tempted. And what does he do? He lets his wife go ahead and eat of the fruit that they were forbidden to eat.
Yeah.
Now, I'll just say this. Whether that's a struggle because I understand, I get that story sounds like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And I'll just go back to this. God can do anything. God can make people out of dirt and put two people in a garden, put a talking snake. That could all happen. Or, if you have a hard time with that, maybe look at it as an allegory, but there's truth everywhere.
Yeah.
And the truth is this. Every man deals with passivity in some way.
Yeah.
It's from the beginning, and you look through the totality of Scripture, and then move beyond that. Look at your own stories in life.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying in that, and I love that you mentioned that to start, because I think the way that I was raised with it, I was never raised to believe that, it was Eve's fault to eat of the fruit, but you were one of the first people, and Flatirons is one of the first people to really go, hey, let's go back to the story of the Garden of Eden. Again, whether you're a Christian or not, you've heard the story, you've heard the narrative. And what I hear you saying is the first mistake there was not Eve going and grabbing of the food. It was Adam's passivity to protect her.
He is called, we say this a lot around here. Men are called to love and protect what God has entrusted them with. Some of us are married. Some of us have kids. Some of us have grandkids.
Yeah.
And we are called to love and protect them. And we're never going to do that perfectly, right? But right out of the gate, and I go back to living in perfection.
Yeah.
When the beauty of Genesis 2:18, and I use this in all the weddings that I do, is Adam's living side by side in communion with God like none of us will have ever experienced. And even in heaven will be different than what Adam had. And even within that, God points out, it's not good for man to be alone. It sounds blasphemous. What God is saying is like, I'm not enough. He needs somebody else. And in the immortal words of, Jerry Maguire, they complete each other. There's a lot of BS around that, but there's truth in that.
Sure.
God creates woman as the counterpart, and they're different, equal but different.
Yeah.
And I think, again, we're going to be looking at image. We're going to be looking at equal but different.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle for Christians.
Yeah.
People who follow Jesus to go equal but different. And that's a struggle for the world, especially.
Yeah.
Equal but different.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I think a lot of people who are listening, myself included, I mean, I've only been married for 2 years. I think a lot of people who are listening are probably in a stage where they're dating, they're looking to date, they're single. And I want to say this too, for anybody who is listening who is single, you can take so much of what we're going to talk about today and lean into it, because it doesn't make you any less of a man, any less of a person. But that singleness time is really a great time to, if that's something you desire, to prepare for what is to come, to prepare for some of those responsibilities. And I think you would say this too. It's not that if you don't have kids, you're not married, you're not dating somebody, that as a man you don't have responsibilities.
Oh, no.
But I love what you said about that, because the first thing that I'm taking away is, number one, hey, we're called to not lean into our passivity. We are called to take the forefront, to take the charge, to protect what God has entrusted to us. I'm curious as we unpack this. I mean, I'd love to hear more about what you have to say about the image of God, all of that. how do young adults do that? How do young men specifically do that? Like, the question I really want to dig into is, as it pertains to leading the women in our lives, how do we do that? As a young man, as a young married man, how would you advise me? As a young single person, how would you advise young single men to start stepping into what it means to be a man and growing in leadership, so that when that time comes when they are leading very specific women or women in their life, how do we start growing in that? How do we lead these women?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna start with a single guy who wrote this. The Apostle Paul was a single guy, and he gives us some really good stuff about marriage and relationship. But in Ephesians 5, he begins with, talking to men and women and husbands and wives. He starts off by saying, submit to one another. And to me, that's the beginning. Now, when you mention the word submit in Christian circles, and then you bring that people who know about Jesus' teachings, about what's in the Word, that submit, that's a volatile word. I never use submit when I do weddings. I use yield and love. And there's something there. So to me, I think therein lies. No one's ever going to do this perfectly.
Yeah.
But that young man who's out there, who's single, is supposed to yield in love to those that he's entrusted with. We're all entrusted. I mean, that's the thing again. Let's go back to the garden. One of the things that I hear people get it wrong all the time, like, if it weren't for the fall, we wouldn't have to work. No, Adam was working. Adam worked. Work is part of our existence. That is part of how we're wired. And so we're called to work. We're already working. Work got hard. And there was all kinds of thorns and metaphorically, all that kind of stuff. So, when we look at that, we go back to the garden and we look at yielding about yielding love, but submit to one another. Before Adam had Eve, he had a job, and he was caring for those. But to me, that falls into where God says he's lonely. He needs someone like him, and now he's entrusted with Eve, and he was supposed to love her and protect her the way he was loving and protecting the garden, which he was entrusted with. So for a single guy, look at your world.
Yeah.
What do you have? Even if you're that guy that can't afford to live in Colorado, you're living in your parents' basement, you're working. I'm creating a scenario.
Sure.
They're working part-time at a restaurant because they're still going to school, all this stuff. They still have stuff that they're entrusted with. They still have people in their life that God has allowed that they are entrusted with. Friends, girlfriend maybe, co-workers, all of that. Yield and love.
That's good.
And you got to be careful. It doesn't mean you open yourself up to be bullied and all of that.
Yeah.
But I just go back to, for single people, it's the same for married people. And when a married couple comes together, this understanding that women, because Paul does kind of hammer that hard, wives submit to your husbands. But his call to men is, men, love your wives as Christ loved the church.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? I mean, it's obvious what it means. Jesus died for the church. So, there's a great responsibility to being a man and an equal responsibility to being a woman. And in the way that God has created us and put us together, we are made to go together.
Yeah.
And we're made to care and love, to submit, to yield and love to each other. And when we do that, that's the best way. That's the best way to do life.
I love that, man. And I love that you really categorized it to yield and love. I think that's two things that we can take from this and go ask ourselves every day. And I can ask myself every day, not just with my wife, but the people around me. How am I yielding? How am I loving? I would be curious to ask you, if you could unpack that maybe a little bit more. What does it mean practically for a young man to step into leadership in the form of yielding and loving and modeling how Jesus loved the church for all the people in our lives? what does it mean to yield and love? Because that sounds really good on the surface. I'm going to yield. I'm going to love. How do I practically do that with especially the women in my life? What does that look like?
Well, I'm going to go old school, Sunday school kind of stuff.
Let's go. Yeah.
Back to Paul's writings, a single guy writing about marriage. Our Savior was a single guy. He was a single man. How did he care for the women in his world? You look at that. I mean, we have these living examples, because the word is living and active. It's a two-edged sword. It's all the stuff we always talk about in these church words.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what happens when we read the word, even if you don't believe it. So many times, I'm going to go back to where in my journey, I wasn't believing it, but I'm reading it. It's like there's something real here. It's alive. And when we look at the stories of Jesus, how did Jesus interact? Look at the women he interacted with. First one's his mom. There's no doubt that his interaction with his parents at 12 years old, after staying behind for 3 days, and they're like, where the hell were you? And Jesus go, hey, I'm about my Father's business. Think about that. What did that mean to his mom? Now, of course, they had all that stuff, right? All that stuff that the miraculous stuff that happened as parents that they had to hold in this weird space. Hey, there were angels in the sky, but he's just a kid. And now this happens. It seems like he's a bit of a smartass when he
Sure.
But I mean, he lived a perfect life. There's something there that he makes a statement.
Yeah.
There's a statement that gets made there in that moment with his parents where I am becoming my own, right? Every man, every woman, every young person has to have that moment where they leave home, and if they don't, then things get out of whack.
Sure.
Right? So again, going back to Jesus, how did Jesus deal with those closest to him? Look at Mary and Martha. The story of Mary and Martha is, for those of us that read the Word and hang out in church, it's one of those, you got Mary's the one at Jesus' feet, and Martha's the one who's grousing in the kitchen. And it's just can be caricaturized. But Jesus cares for both of them well. He loves and protects them. And so in that, he speaks truth, but in a loving way. And I would maybe... When I think about this is on my mind a lot. I just recently had to kind of like really look at our staff value raw and real, what that means. And at its core, it just means being completely honest about who you are, honest with others, and then being protective. You got to protect it. Because you can be really honest, and in that world be brutally honest. Nobody wants you to be brutally honest.
Sure.
Nobody wants to be brutalized by your honesty. They want to be protected. And you can still do both. You can be honest and protect. And I think that's a key part in a relationship, as a married couple, in dating, but even for that single man and woman dealing with like being honest. You have to be vulnerable, which is a scary thing to do.
Yeah.
But and at the same time protecting yourself. But I know that we're still, as a society, worldwide culture, all that, we're still trying to figure out what life looks like after COVID.
Yeah.
And there's people that are still afraid to be in the public, and there's still people that are struggling through relational stuff. And a big part of it is because for the entire world felt very vulnerable. There's this bug out there that's going to kill us all, right? And whatever forget the politics. The world shut down for a couple of years because the people were afraid we're all going to die, right? There was this point where this could all happen. You kind of felt that. And now we're reeling from that. There's a lot of people still feeling vulnerable.
Yeah.
So stepping into that. So if you're going to mirror Christ in a relationship, you're going to love and protect, right?
In or out of a relationship. I love that you drew it back to Jesus, because you started off, and I agree with this, that we have a lot of bad examples in the Bible because we have a lot of people in Scripture. It's not, I think we have this misconception that people in Scripture are holier than we are, better, but there's a lot of broken people that God uses, that God reaches. But then you point to Jesus, and Jesus is really the standard. I mean, he is this beautiful depiction of how to love and yield and protect and also submit to his Father. and to yield to what God is doing in his life. I kind of want to circle back just as a woman to leadership, because I hear this a lot from young adult women, specifically in a dating relationship, pursuing marriage or engaged. A lot of, and myself included, I really wrestled with like, once I got to a relationship, I was like, what does it mean for this guy to lead me? And I had this misconception, I think, that I was like, he's not leading enough Bible studies with me.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is just an honest thing. Like, I talked to other young adult women who are like, I feel like he's supposed to be praying with me more. And I'm not also saying that those things aren't wrong, but Connor and I have had a lot of conversation around what it means, because also I'm a leader. I'm a leader in my career. I've been a leader on my team, so I also lead.
Right.
And so it's not that this might be a whole other podcast. It's not that I am inferior to Connor, but I do see this like the importance of this male headship and leadership.
Yeah.
And so I know for Connor and I, we've wrestled with, I think, pointing back to the image of Jesus. Jesus knew who he was. Like, he knew who he was, and he knew what he came to do. And he was able to yield to that, to the Father, to his mission, and then love and protect the people entrusted to him in his life. Everyone. I think when Connor is not leading me or our home well, it's when he is off track with who he is.
Right.
It's an identity thing. It's not like, did he wake up this morning at 6 a.m. and go like, Embry, let's go do our 5-minute devotion together. Again, not wrong.
Right.
But can you give us a picture specifically for that young adult who's wondering, like, they're in a relationship and from a female, like, how do they lead me? What should I be looking for? Can you give us an image of leadership gone wrong, like biblical leadership gone wrong, and then biblical leadership maybe to aim for?
Sure. First of all, I've only been around Connor a couple of times, but he's the bomb.
He's the bomb.com.
Connor, we love you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Love you most.
This is. I'm going to talk about some stuff probably that could sound hurtful because just the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
And I would say, for those that I've seen, for myself in particular, so much of who a man becomes is so influenced by their father.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that can be birth father, that could be adopt, that could be a mentor, someone who steps in early. But whatever model you've been given, good or bad, is going to affect you as a man. So, I mean, it could just
absolutely.
I know he'd be fine with me sharing this. My son-in-law grew up his parents divorced early on. He was a year and a half, 2 years old. His father had been in and out of his life. His dad's a train wreck. And when he first started hanging with our daughter Katie at 7th grade, I was a dad. I was protecting her. I was like, no, this kid comes from a train wreck. He has no clue what. And I was so concerned, and it created tension because they're married now.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening was this, and I think what tends to happen with men and women is whatever example, if it's bad, they will either slide that direction with this, like, well, this is just who I am, right? Or they will go the other way, which is what Nick did. Nick is one of the most, straightforward, honest, full of integrity young man. I didn't pick him. Matter of fact, I tried to get rid of him, but I'm grateful that God overrode me on that. But yeah, I mean, so we can't overlook just the reality of where we come from.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that God can't redeem it. I've seen God redeem it in Nick's life.
Absolutely.
And so many other lives. My father-in-law is another one. I won't get into that. God can redeem anything. But I think there needs to be someone to step in or someone for them to look for it. If they don't have it, to look for it. What does it not look like biblically? I mean, the irony of some of this stuff in the Bible and stuff that we say is like when you mention, hey, how about King David? Well, King David was a man after God's own heart. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I see that early on. You know, he slays Goliath up to there. Yeah, he's a man after God's own heart. After that part, after he marries Michal, Saul's his daughter. I mean, I don't see that. He's like one of the worst fathers.
Yeah.
You know, just like a selfish, comes off like a selfish, and this is what happens when is that we need to, so that's a bad biblical example. I can't help, and I'm going to try to, as I think through this, Jesus is the example, and I keep coming back to, I didn't spend a very long time as a single person. I admit it. I got married at 21. So I didn't spend a lot of time. I didn't date a whole lot. There's that. But Jesus is a great example. And I think that when we look at, when I look at other biblical men, while not perfect, I think Joseph's story is a story of endurance. It's a story of integrity. It's a story of living out what you believe despite your circumstances. Because you have this kid, he's dad's favorite, gets the special coat. Of course, his other 11 brothers hate him. Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
They want to kill him. I think Reuben's the one that said, no, we're going to kill him. But they throw him in a pit, and then they sell him. And then for 20-some years, from the time that he leaves that pit up until he assumes second in command in Egypt, he is living in a pagan culture. I mean, I think the estimate like 10 years of that was in prison for something he didn't do.
Yeah.
And he stayed true to who he was, even though he had no community. He stayed true to who he was in God's eyes, in the worst of circumstances, in prison, and then still as a slave of sorts. And then he sees God's fulfillment decades later when those dreams that drove his family nuts, including his dad, they're like, shut up. I'm not going to bow down to you.
Yeah.
And then he uses those dreams to save the known world at that time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a good biblical. Now, how does that translate to today, to people today? I mean, it's hard. I mean, I'm sitting here. I'm a father. My son turns 38 this year. My daughter's 33 in another month. So I'm done. I've moved from way past raising them, and they got the kids and stuff. But one of the things that I don't know about, I'm only seeing from this. I don't know what it's like to raise a kid with a smartphone. Ben and Katie they had flip phones nearing the end of their tenure in our home.
Sure.
The smartphone came afterward. The smartphone has changed the world. It has changed how people interact with each other. It's changed how people view themselves, right? I mean, wouldn't you say so much of the struggles that young people have today is comparison?
100%.
I mean, it's just like
100%.
That's all it is, right? How do you compare to whatever TikTok, phenom, or whatever influencer is on Instagram, or and for old farts like me, they still do it with Facebook. Sure. How do you measure up? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
So there is an element to, I would say, for young people today, which is going to be hard, to go counterculture.
Yeah.
But that's hard to do.
Absolutely. So correct me if I'm wrong here. What I hear you saying is this: when it comes to positively leading and actually taking a good example, you're looking at the story of Joseph. I think what I hear you saying is there was a sense of Joseph, number one, never abandoned his integrity, and number two, because that's because Joseph knew who he was in God's eyes.
Yeah.
And so what I hear you saying is kind of the thing that, especially if you're single, but even if you're dating, you're engaged, whatever, that specifically as men, but people in general, we have to figure out is who we are first.
Right.
How do you do that? How do you've had a huge impact on my life of helping me figure out, hey, before, and I saw God be really gracious to me with this in my life, before I ever met Emma or Emma was brought to me, he gave me a lot of time to wrestle with my own identity so I could find security in that and actually know this is who I am. I'm not going to abandon my convictions and integrity. How would you encourage young men and young people in general to figure that out, to have that assurance of this is who I am so they can live out of that integrity? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's all trial and error, right? Life is trial and error. We're never going to get it. We're not perfect people. We're going to make mistakes. Now, do we learn from our mistakes? Mm-hmm. And I go back to, I would say, speaking personally for me, and my dad's still alive, believe it or not, and he's not Methuselah. But I mean, they just started really early too. But he's a shell of who he used to be. He's on the tail end of life. But he was not a perfect dad, and he didn't do everything right. But what he did show me was what a man does on a day-to-day, how he loves, protects, cares for his family, gets up in the morning, goes to work, comes in, and then loves and cares. He was a very loving father. I would say very demonstratively loving. We're a family that kisses, not on the lips, but
There's two types of families.
Yes.
You either kiss or
but
you
what
don't.
I'm saying? It's like, I kissed my dad goodnight on the cheek before I went to bed until I was in 8th grade.
Wow.
No, I take it back. Dave was in 8th grade. He's 2 years older. He didn't do it one night, and I didn't do it that night. And I guess we don't do this anymore.
That was the moment.
But anyway, I would say we didn't have a perfect example. We had an example. So do you have an example of an earthly person? If you don't, seek them out and get intrusive. You go, like, I need your help. I see something in you, and I am lost. Can you help me? Or maybe you don't even say that. I would say this, Christian, what I experienced with you were an intern.
Yep.
And you came on and helped in men's community, and men's ministry. And what you did was you saddled up with us and you asked questions. I remember going through Mark Moore's Chronological Life of Christ, and the questions you asked and your perspective was different than Justin Morgan, who is
J-Mo,
younger than me, older than you. We kind of had this kind of the age bracket going through that and looking at our different perspectives. But what I saw in you was seeking that out. And we had conversations. Again, you had a great dad, but you don't have a perfect dad.
Yeah.
Nobody's got a perfect dad. Nobody's got a perfect mom. You're not going to, as much as you appear to be, you're not going to be a perfect mom.
I know. I'm already thinking about the therapy that Tripp's going to need because of me.
Or
Gosh darn.
you could wind up like me and just hear it regularly, the mistakes you make regularly from the stage.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's how everyone knows Dan Foote. Ben's sermons talking about his upbringing.
Yeah, there you go.
Just kidding.
There you go.
Yeah.
No, that's huge. So, I mean, that's seeking out. I think it's so simple, but it needs to be said. You have to look for an example, because what I really hear you saying that I just kind of want to crystallize is what it means to yield and protect is, and this is going back to what you mentioned when it comes to the image of God. It's first and foremost being able to see the image of God in yourself clearly, figure out what that looks like and how to live that out. And then number two, what it means to yield and protect the women in our lives, the people in our lives, is to also see the image of God in them.
Yes.
And protect them and fight for, number one, fight for what agrees with what the image of God says about them. And number two, to protect them against anything that would try to attack their identity to say anything else is different. Because here's the reality, and Amber, you can obviously speak to this more than anything. But me having a wife, having a younger sister, the thing that I am seeing more and more is that the image of God is under attack in both men and women, but so uniquely under attack in women, to tell them that you are nothing but what you are physically, but what your sexuality offers, all these different messages. And so what I hear you saying is to lead my wife is to, number one, serve her, yield to her, say, hey, I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to comfort you. Like, I am going to serve you. I'm not going to domineer you. I'm going to serve you and make sure that your life, your gifting, your purpose can flourish. But number two, it's when everything else in the world is coming against her, fighting against her. You're not pretty. You're not good enough. You're not worthy. You're not worth loving. It is my job to reinforce that she is worth loving, that she is pretty, that she is good, and protect against that. Does that sound correct?
Dude, hell yeah.
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 I just wanted to summarize that because I feel like that's kind of been the the narrative kind of woven through this whole conversation that I really wanted to crystallize was that's what it means to yield and protect the women in our lives. It's number one, look at ourselves and go, what does God say about me? Who am I? I'm not trying to get anything from anybody else. I know who I am. I am a man who images God, who protects and fights for the people in his life, because that's my job as a man. And then number two, it means out of that place, I look at the women in my life and I go, what does God say about you? And how, with the way that I live my life, how do I reinforce and fight for the truth to be reinforced in your life of this is who God says you are? And when something tries to come against that and take it away, I'm stepping in and I'm protecting against that.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and what did you say, 2 years? You and I have been
Yep.
married for 2 years. You and Connor, you at 5 yet?
5 years together?
Yeah, 5 years married?
No, we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary.
3
Yeah,
year.
be 3 for
Okay,
me
so
in
yeah,
September
2,
too. Yeah.
3. Yeah, we're 42 in August. But the thing is,
Had a little
Congrats.
bit of
Let's
time,
go.
yeah.
is they're in a relationship in this. What I have learned over and over is to just say I'm sorry. You know, I'm sorry is one of the most powerful things you can do. To do it truthfully, to really be repentant and say you're sorry to your spouse, to your kids. It's one of those, and then
Girlfriend, anybody, yeah.
yeah, that goes true with your friends too,
Friends, yeah.
right? And it gets back to this image thing you're talking about. When we understand that we are created in God's image, and really to dive into the truth that both men and women, it's in the Word, we're created, men and women, in God's image. God is, together. There's something almost mystical that happens. Men and women together are a little representation of God Himself.
Yeah.
Right? That's the whole thing we do weddings, right?
Yeah.
You're going to, this covenant of wedding, you two and God together, creating this little trinity and together to understand that, yes, but they are different. There are different aspects in a woman. A lot of times today, we just have culture, we have media, we have everybody telling us that this is what a man looks like and this is what a woman looks like in those drastic, real
contrast.
men drive big trucks and, all that BS that isn't manhood. Matter of fact, a lot of times like, oh, you're insecure in your manhood.
Yeah. I got all the truck jokes that all look old.
And then women are supposed to look like that. They're supposed to dress this way. And then now on top of that, we just live in a culture where they're going, it's alphabet soup. Just mix it all together. You can have these parts, but because we're lost in our identity. Understand, and I'm not saying we live in a fallen, broken world. I'm sure that there are genetic aspects to this. I can't help but look at that and go, there's some genetic, but besides the genetics of it, we, in this fallen, broken world, there's an enemy against us.
Yeah.
Who is a liar, who is going to tell lies about everything that's important to us. And the only way to circumvent, to understand who you are, your identity, the lies that they tell you about your identity, the lie that culture tells you about who you're supposed to be in this world, the lie that tells you about your importance, what the world tells you is a lie, is to continually seek truth. And that's the reason why biblical authority, it's the living and active Word of God tells us who we are, whose we are, and who we are, and how we live through that.
That's so good. That might be the clip right there. That was awesome. No, I love that because what I think a practical takeaway that you're saying in that is the first step to discovering who you are and then discovering who other people are so you know how to yield and protect is you have to go to number one, God's Word to give you that truth, that definition of it, but you also have to continually seek Jesus. And again, I know it sounds cliche and weird, but I really do think that is the step. As you said, hey, number one, seek other people out who you think are modeling that. But number two, get in and do some research and figure it out for yourself. What kind of man was Jesus? What does the Bible say about being a man, being a woman? And then start asking yourself that question of how do I start living that out in my life? How do I start living out truth? Because if you're living out the truth, not only is it going to reassure who you are, but it's going to help you reassure and protect the people in your life, which I think is so huge.
Really
because it, like you, I think you mentioned this earlier, Ambry, it all comes down to identity. Because I think the parts of my life where I've been the worst husband, the worst boyfriend, the worst friend, the worst worker here, whatever, worst teammate, has been when I'm insecure in my identity and I'm trying to gain something to validate it. The parts where I can actually yield, where I can love the people in my life, are where I'm not questioning who I am, where my insecurities aren't as present, aren't as powerful. And I think that's huge, because you mentioned that about Jesus. There was this assurance, and you mentioned this in the story of him being away from his parents, being at the temple, spending time. Hey, I'm about my Father's business. There was an assurance of who he was. I know who I am, therefore I know what I'm supposed to do. And I think for any young man that's listening, and Dan, please correct me if I'm wrong, or both you chime in on this, I think that really is step one. You got to go figure out who you are. And that's not, hey, what is my job? That's not, hey, what kind of clothes do I wear? What kind of car do I drive? That is, this is who I am as a man, and I'm sure of it. I'm not trying to gain any sort of validation for myself. I'm not trying to use the women or the people in my life to give me something. They are in my life so I can give them something, so I can serve them, because I don't need anything. That's like primo step one.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And the only addendum I would put on that is that this is not something that you discover on your own, meaning that the truth is this: there was a sperm that swam fastest and got into the egg first that created all of us, right?
Yeah.
It didn't, and we stand firm on the truth that was not an accident.
Sure.
That was God fulfilling what he says in Scripture about being fearfully and wonderfully made.
On purpose.
You were created on purpose. There's a brokenness that's inherent to this world that's going to be part of this creation. But when we go to this, so instead of saying like, I'm a blank slate, who am I? No, first of all, you got to start with, you are a child of God. That's the starting point.
Yeah.
I think we live in a world where nobody's starting from there. They're just starting from this like, I don't know who I am. Am I a man? Am I a woman? Am I like, I don't know, am I a butch guy? And so in this journey of discovering who you are, with all kinds of fits and starts and mistakes along the way that we all learn, if we don't start with this understanding that you are a child of God, that God actually orchestrated that miracle of birth for this reason. I mean, that's what you're instilling. How old is Tripp?
6 months.
Yeah, but you're already doing it, right? You're telling him who he is. And it's more than just the words you use. Way more.
Yeah.
If I have learned anything as a parent, it isn't what I said, it's what I did. For good and bad.
Yeah.
So that's part of it too, is like in this journey, as you begin this journey in discovering who you are, put aside all that the world says, but start from square one. I am a child of God, created for a purpose, for this time in this place. Now, how do I love, protect, and with what I'm entrusted with, whatever it is.
Yeah, and modeling how Jesus did it. Because I think it sounds so good on the surface, just to say, love and protect. My question I always come back to is how. And again, it's looking at Jesus and going out of the assurity of his own identity, knowing that he was the Son of God, he was God himself. I mean, and there's always a weird thing we're not going to be able to understand there, where he was the Son of God, he was God himself. Right. There's an assurance of his identity that led to how he treated and loved and protect people. And I think that's so huge to talk about and understand, because I think that's the question we have to be asking ourselves every day, especially if we're dating, if we're looking to date, is, man, how do I love and protect this person? Regardless of whether or not I even end up marrying them, how do I love and protect them? Because I think that's like, when I think of the man that I want to be, the legacy, I want people to get to the end of the road and said, he wasn't perfect, he didn't do everything right, but he fought like hell to make sure that everybody in his life knew who God said they were and what God said about them. And he fought for and he protected that. And I think that's got to be like the banner statement. If we're looking, what does it mean to lead? Ask yourself that question every day. How do I yield to, serve them, and how do I protect them from anything that's going to come take? Because we can't tell them who they are. I can't tell my wife who she is. I can't tell my little sister. I can't tell Ambry who she is. I can't tell my friends who they are. What I can do is reinforce, hey, God can tell you who you are, and I'm going to reinforce what he says about you.
Right.
I'm not going to play that role of I'm not God in your life, but I'm going to fight like hell to make sure that you know what God says about you. And I'm going to treat you in such a way that reflects that. I'm not going to value you for your sexuality. I'm going to value you because you are a child of God made in his image. And sexuality is important in that, but I'm not going to value you for that. I'm not going to value what you can do for me. I'm going to look at you and say, you have value apart from me and apart from anything else, just because God says so, and he made you in his image. And I think that's huge.
No, I want to wrap this up. I want to highlight something.
I think
that
we
you
have
said
to
in
because
that.
that light just went out.
This light did go out.
Oh boy.
That's right. I know. Yeah, you can't see. I can't even see you anymore, dude.
It's God saying, hey, wrap it up, guys.
Yeah, that's right. We're done.
Yeah.
We are, well, and we will wrap this up. I think there's so many golden things that were said. And I feel like I just want to pluck and highlight something real quick. You guys, especially pointing to the image of Jesus and how I've been impacted as a woman by being influenced and led by men, not just Connor, who I've been in a relationship with, just being influenced by healthy masculinity, healthy biblical masculinity. It's really that servant aspect. You see it. Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve. You see it in the adulterous woman when the woman was guilty, brought before the Lord or brought before Jesus, and she could have been punished by death, and he was the first one to stop it, to not just save her from death, but also to be like, this is not my best for you. There's better life. There's a better life for you. But I think that coming back to serving, you've said it so well. Like, if we can, how I have experienced healthy masculinity is men not using leadership as a power thing, like this, I am above. And you've said this so well too, that I'm not above you. I am using my leadership to serve. And that's what we see in Jesus.
Yeah.
And I've heard it said, the higher up in leadership we go, they're talking about career, but the higher up in leadership we go, it literally means the more people we serve.
Right.
Not the higher up in leadership we go, the more responsibilities and the more all those things. I mean, that's all probably true, but the higher up in leadership we go, the more people we serve. Jesus emulated this so well. And in that world, in his kingdom, but in that time that he walked the earth, in that time, women were elevated in a culture where they didn't even count. And so I will, speaking for me, benefit from a world where Jesus is king.
Sure.
I benefit in a world where men are looking to Jesus as the example. And it's not just that I am inferior to that example. It's like he is the elevator. That's not right. The lifter of my
The one who elevates.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Not the thing that you go up and go. Yeah. Cut that. cut the elevator thing. But I think servant leadership is what is lacking in a lot of ways. But I think that's so key. And I'm not a man, but I think that's so key in how I experienced biblical masculinity.
Even the concept of submission, it's been damaged. The greatest damage that's been done to that word and that concept and understanding has been done by followers of Jesus.
Totally.
Yeah.
They've
Just
done it poorly.
inferiority. And we can talk about that at a different time entirely, because there's so much
For
to
sure.
unpack.
And there's a difference between, you hear leadership and you think, oh, I'm over somebody, versus leading means you're influencing them towards Jesus.
Yeah, that's flipping it on its head.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus did.
Yeah.
Dan, I feel like I just want to ask, like, what he would leave a young adult with.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
100%.
A young adult, working professional, single, dating, engaged, some married, just speaking to the man, what encouragement would you want to give them? And Christian, do you want to put a spin on that?
No, I think that's great. I think the question is just like, after this entire conversation, what's burning in your heart to say, like, hey, if you had of young men specifically, what would you want to bless them with, leave them with, encourage them with, challenge them with?
Yeah, it's just part of, I feel like it's the season in life that I'm at. I am coming to the close of my time at Flatirons. At some point, I always jokingly say sometime between tomorrow and 5 years, probably. But it's just like and I'm also in a different season in life. My kids are grown, my grandchildren are growing, but it's still, until Jesus returns. We're entrusted with these humans, and we're entrusted with these communities. And I've always seen, I would say, I feel like the heart of who Jesus is and the heart of the kingdom of God can be found in the Sermon on the Mount. So when you go to the Sermon on the Mount, you go to Matthew 5 and you read through, and before you get to the end, which ends with the wise and foolish builder, it's been a key verse of mine. And And it's Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And all this other stuff will be added to you as well. And what Jesus ends the whole section about life. What are you worried about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink? Don't worry about it. God takes care of birds. He'll take care of you. All that stuff about living, the stuff that we're all, the human condition is our walk on this planet and how we live it and what we do with it. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. The promise is from God's mouth, and all this other stuff will be taken care of as well.
That's good.
Let's go.
Awesome,
Lean
Dan.
on it. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks
Yeah.
We appreciate it, man.
Thanks for inviting me.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah.
We invited Ben and Ben's dad.
Yeah.
Amazing. No, we appreciate it, Dan.
Appreciate you, Dan.
Thank you.